Good morning, Year 1 parents. Thank you very much for attending this meeting. What I'll be doing is going over the plans for us to open up the school here at WSO and to ensure that student safety is, of course, our utmost priority. So please, as I go through this, please listen carefully. And at the end, if there's any questions that you need, then I'll make sure to try and answer them. But also, we've been very thorough in this presentation, so we should be able to cover most of the questions that most parents will have. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Brian McCauley. I'm the Assistant Principal for Year 1 and 2. Most of you will actually have known me from last year where I was in the foundation stage. I'm now moving up with the children and with yourselves, and so I'm sure you'll see me on the corridors on a daily basis. And hopefully, if you've got any questions, of course, you know my email address, so you'll be able to reach out if you've got any further questions. Just to confirm the school structure in terms of the leadership team, we still have Kevin Loft as our CEO. We've got our new principal, Nathan Sadler, and Miss O'Regan. She's left to go to Wellington Primary School as CEO there. We have three our vice principals, apologies. We have Jo Keaton, who's remained in her position. We now have two new vice principals, Ellen Henretti and Becky Lewis. As I said myself, I'm the assistant principal. And then you've got Lauren Tunney, who's the head of the academic year now, last year, or head of Year 1. Last year, it would have been Miss Pearson, that you would have known was head of the Foundation Stage 2 team. It's Miss Tunney, who is head of Year 1. Please, just before we start, I'd like to just say that one of the things I do want to stress throughout the whole process of reopening the school, children's safety has been at the forefront of everything that we've done. So please understand that every decision we've taken with the students at the forefront of our mind. Okay, so during the session, what I'm going to cover is how we actually went through the process of reopening, parent communication. So how do we plan to communicate with you as parents, but also how do we ensure that we can keep that consistent moving forward? Of course, the safety precautions and procedures during the drop-off, during pickup, in class and on the bus. What year groups will actually be receiving. So the details and logistics around each particular year group, because it's slightly different depending on the student's age. The curriculum provision, the procedures, should anyone start to show symptoms of COVID, and that's very much dictated to by us in terms of government expectations of what we will do. And then just some frequently asked questions that I'll go over at the very end. Additionally, I'd like to say thank you to a lot of the parents who, during the sign-up form that was shared with you by Mr. Sadler, you managed to fill out and asks a number of very important questions. And these questions have actually been fed into actually putting this presentation together. So that was one of the things that I really want to make sure we thank you for. And of course, as I said, during the session, if there are any questions, I'll make sure to answer them as best that I can. So first of all, just to go over it, we first of all had our KHDA. They released this at the start of the summer holidays. They released basically a reopening school policy that all schools would have to follow those guidelines. As a school then, WSO got together, our executive leadership team worked really hard on this, and they put their plans together. The plans were then submitted to the KHDA. And of course, there was a bit of discussion between the KHDA just to make sure that we were meeting all of the governmental expectations. But once that was all done, we then had our KHDA approval. Now, this only happened a couple of weeks ago. So we would have loved to have been able to communicate with you and saying, here's what we're doing to open much earlier. However, we had to wait. We were asked to not communicate with parents until we had that KHDA approval. So that was one of the things that we really wanted to do. But of course, we were being asked to err on the side of caution and to not do that until the KHDA gave us the green light. The good news was, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, we got that green light, and then Mr. Sadler shared with you the communication in terms of how the school is going to look once it is open. And through that communication, then we were able to actually ask parents for feedback, which then has gone into feeding into this particular presentation. Sorry, excuse me. So, parent communication. So, of course, you've received the letter from Mr. Sadler that would have been sent out to all parents. It then followed up with a Zoom session, which most of you will have attended this particular Zoom session and the communication. We'll then send you a welcome back video, which I believe most of you should have received recently. Should have been a welcome video to show the students how to return to school. And what we will be doing is not just having our regular parent handbook, because most schools will have one, but we're actually putting together a COVID-19 parent handbook, which kind of will give you further instruction and further information about what's going to take place and how we have ensured that the different procedures that are in place are there to support the students, the community, and ensure safety. And then finally, we've got our Meet the Teacher. So we're really lucky that we usually have a Meet the Teacher session, but this year is going to be slightly different. we're going to have those sessions prior to school actually starting. So students will either be able to have a phone call, have a Zoom session, or actually follow up with a face-to-face meeting with the parents, with the class teacher, apologies. So the teacher and the parents can meet face-to-face. Of course, with that, there will be certain protocols that parents and students will have to adhere to when they come into the school, but those, of course, will be relayed to you in due time. So how are we going to keep our students safe? So as mentioned, we're working really closely with the KHDA and GEMS corporate office to ensure that we have the highest safety standards that we possibly can for our students. So during drop-off, so possibly one of the busiest times in school, we've had to think very carefully about, because of course we need to make sure that we don't have lots of people together at one time in the school. So how have we ensured that? So here we go. There'll be two thermal cameras in school. These are the same thermal cameras that you would see at any of the Dubai Mall. I was just recently at the Mall of the Emirates, and again, as you walk through, you've got a person there with a laptop and the thermal camera, and of course, it through some magic is picking up the exact temperature of that person. If a person was to come in and their temperature was 37.5 degrees or above, they wouldn't be able to have entry into the school. So we'd have to ask them to maybe take a bit of time to cool down. It is still very warm outside, so maybe just give them a chance to cool down, and then they can walk back. They can try to make their way back through the thermal cameras. Again, if that reading was above 37.5, they wouldn't be allowed to come into the school. There'd be staggered start times, and this is to decrease the number of students entering at one. So I'll go through a little bit more about what that looks for year one in terms of their timings. But the one thing I would like to stress is that please do try to adhere to those staggered start times, because we do have different times for the foundation stage to year 1 and 2 students. And also, even within each year group, we'll be giving parents slightly different times as to when they should be doing the drop-off. And it's really important that we try our best to adhere to those times to decrease the number of people passing through the school at one time. There's going to be a one-way system, and that's going to be there to try to avoid anyone walking past one another. We'll, of course, will have markings on the floor just to ensure that people remember social distancing. Masks are mandatory for anyone 6 years of age or above, and I will clarify a little bit about that with regards to year 1 students coming later on in the presentation. From FS1 to year 2 students, they'll be dropped off by one adult, and the maximum time in school should be around 10 minutes. So you have about 10 minutes when you come into the school to drop your child off and then to exit the building. The classroom doors will always be open. So what you can do is, as you walk past the classroom, you can drop your child off, and then your child will make their way into class, and then as a parent, you can make your way back out to your car. Year 3 and above students, they're going to make their way to their classroom independently. Of course, there'll be school members that'll be there to actually support them to make sure that they get to the right classroom. Sanitizing stations will be around the corridors and will be in classrooms. So there will always be that opportunity. On top of that, a number of students and parents have asked, can children bring their own hand sanitizer? I know a number of teachers will be walking around with our own, we'll be walking around with our own hand sanitizer. So if anyone did need any, we're always there to support the parents on the corridors. Please try not to stop in at the reception desk with queries such as questions about teachers or asking teachers questions at the door. And this is going to be quite of a difficult one. From my experience in the foundation stage, the one thing I could say is I'm very aware that having that face-to-face time in the morning, having that conversation with the class teacher, it's so organic, it just naturally happens with the class teacher. But of course, these are pretty uncertain times. And so with that, what we want to make sure is that we don't present any chances for anyone to pick up, to kind of cross-contaminate. So what I would suggest is, whenever we are having the drop-off, please can I ask parents just to make sure that when they are dropping off, it's not a time to stop and ask the teacher questions. Our communication with teachers will again be through Seesaw and email, and again, speaking to the reception desk, that'll be through contact us email address right here. But on top of that, if you do need to speak to anyone, we do have our usual protocols of email, Seesaw, and of course there is the option of telephoning through to the reception desk there. So when the students are in class, how will we ensure that we keep them safe? So students are divided into smaller groups. And again, I'll explain that even more in the next coming slides, just to explain how year one will look. But we're going to describe these as bubbles. Students will have to keep a distance of 1.5 meters between themselves and other students. This will be in the form of desks. So when you come past the classrooms, you'll see that we have spaced out the desks to ensure that students are socially distant. Students will be reminded regularly to wash and sanitize their hands. FS1 and 2 students will use their in-class toilet, which will be cleaned after every use. And years 1 to 6, we will also be using toilets. We'll use the corridor ones. And of course, after each use, they will be cleaned. Students will not be able to go to the bathroom in groups. They'll be going individually. So it'll be very much a slow and staggered system to ensuring students can go to the bathroom and then make their way back to the classroom. Of course, after every use, there will be somebody there to wipe down and sanitize the toilets in a staggered fashion. So of course, students and teachers, years 6 years of age and above, will have to wear a mask at all times. Now, we are just waiting final approval from the KHDA, because there is turning 6 years old is actually most of year one. Halfway throughout the year, or at some point throughout the year, we'll go from 5 to being 6. So we're just waiting for final confirmation, and this will go into the COVID-19 handbook that we're preparing for teachers once we get that approval, or that further clarification from the KHDA, because we want to ensure that, is it up to year one they don't have to wear masks, or is it year 6 and above? So we just want to make sure that we've got that finalized. But at the moment, the expectation is that if anyone is 6 years old, they should be asked to wear a mask at all times. And of course, that's unless there's a medical reason, or if they're doing strenuous exercise. Classrooms will have a deep clean and will be sterilized every day. Toys and resources will be cleaned and sterilized after every single use. And students will have their own pack of resources. Now, this will be relayed to you in terms of what resources the children will need to be in class, but we won't be allowing children to share, which again is slightly sad, because it's one of the things that we want to encourage students to do, is to be able to share and to talk with one another, and to share the coloring pencils that they've maybe got as a gift. So that's almost quite an organic thing that would happen naturally within school, but sadly, due to the current situation, we won't be advising, the children will not be allowed to do that. They'll be advised that they should not be sharing, and that they've got their own set of resources. Any materials and textiles that cannot be sterilized have been removed, and the classrooms, so for instance, one of the things that you'll notice will be missing from a classroom will be the carpets that are in front of the interactive whiteboards. So students won't be able to actually interact, won't be able to sit on the carpet, because of course we wouldn't be able to sanitize them as well. In class continued, students will have their lunch in their classrooms at their designated tables. So as I mentioned, all the tables will be spaced at 1.5 meters, and the students will do majority of their work there, and on top of that, they will also eat their lunch and their snack there. Of course, we'll be able to disinfect and wipe down the surface. No one else will sit at that place but that child. So once your child has found that they've got their own place, they'll have their name, they'll have their box of resources with all of the resources that they use. So that could be glue sticks, scissors, pencils, coloring pencils, felt tips, whatever they'll be. They'll have their own tray with their own resources at their own desk, their own personal space, where they'll have their own lunch and they'll have their snack. And that will be the independent place where those things will be able to take place. Students will stay in their classroom and will only move outside of the classroom to go to PE. So what that means is that all other specialist lessons that take place, such as Arabic, Islamic, French, performing arts, will all take place within the particular classroom. Okay, and for PE, please also understand that PE teachers will also be adhering to social distancing rules, so the students won't be coming in contact with each other. So please don't almost have that image of running around and bouncing into one another. That's not what's going to take place. The students will be keeping their social distance, and if they do use resources that move from one child to another, of course, those resources will of course be sanitized each and every use between lesson to lesson. So we will ensure that. When students come into school on their PE day, they should wear their full PE kit. Okay, and then of course we do want to try and get students outside. Once the weather's cooler, we will start to allocate break times outside. However, students will be asked to stay within their bubbles during their time outside. Now, in the next slide, I will go over how bubbles look for year one, because it's slightly different for year one versus some of the other year groups, and I will explain how that looks within a particular classroom. For picking students up, of course, picking students up, that will be a very similar process to the drop-off. So again, it'll be the parents will come in, you will come through a thermal camera, you will walk through the one-way system, pick up your child from the classroom, and then exit the school as soon as possible. And again, there'll be a 10-minute window for that to take place. I've really got to reiterate about staying home if unwell. There's a strict staying home if unwell policy that we will have to make sure that parents are adhering to. So if your child is not well, please do keep them at home. It's better to err on the side of caution than for them to be given some Calpol or some Panadol and then sent into school. It's going to be much better for the parents and for the students if the students stay home and still can access some of the learning remotely from home. We were asking parents to check the children's temperature before bringing them into school, and any children showing any symptoms would be taken to the clinic. One of the questions that's been quite common whenever I've done these sessions is, will we be doing testing in school? And no, we won't be doing testing of students in school. What we will be doing is looking at temperature and, of course, any symptoms. So the bus. Now, a number of parents are using the bus. Are still using STS bus services, but just to give everyone a bit of an idea about how this works, they're going to be operating at half capacity, and there will be seating markers. This will accurately guide children on where they should be sitting. So signs will be strategically placed around the bus, guiding your child towards any respiratory hygiene and waste management practices when on the bus. So how to make sure that they can keep themselves safe on the bus, those will be all available for the students to see and will be informed of. Your child will be required, if they're using the bus, to go through again a temperature check. If they're 37.5 degrees or above, they will not be allowed onto the bus. And of course, we will ensure that there's a high standard of hygiene on the bus. Before a child enters the bus, all seat belts, seats, armrests, handles, and rails, they'll all be sanitized. And again, this is in a guidance from the RTA. So we will be making sure that we will wipe down all of the surfaces. Therefore, students coming into the school will make sure that they've all been through a temperature check and, of course, the sanitization of their bus. Okay, so due to the limitations on bubble sizes, we don't have the capacity to have every single year group from FS1 all the way through to secondary school. We don't have the opportunity to have all of the students to come in for 100% face-to-face learning. Therefore, what we've done is we've prioritized FS1 Tier 2. From feedback from last academic year in Term 3, a lot of the feedback was that due to these students needing additional support from parents, it would be much better for them to be in school. And that's something that I would agree with. Year 3 and above, they're only going to be accessing learning through a blended approach, which is 50% in school and 50% at home, because the feedback from years 3 and above were that they were actually a lot more independent and able to access the learning a lot easier. But year 1 students will be coming to the school every single day. The class will be capped at 27 students. So the maximum number of students in a class, let's say it's class 1A, they will be capped at 27 students, and each class will have a teacher and a teaching assistant. And that is the same as it's been every single year. Students in a class will be split into 4 stable learning groups in a maximum of 7. So what I want you to think about is this. What we're doing is we are then taking a class, so 27 students, and we are splitting them into 2 further classrooms. So we take 27 students and we split it into a 13 and a 14 into 2 classrooms, okay? And within each of those classrooms, there's going to be a perspex divider that will split them into even smaller groups of 7. And the reason why we're doing that is because the smaller we can make the bubbles, the easier it is for us to do contact tracing, but also ensures that there's less chance of them coming in contact with more than multiple one person. So we'll still, even within those smaller bubbles, adhere to social distancing of 1.5 meters. And the students, and I think this is the most important thing, is they will still have access to a full year 1 curriculum experience. They'll still get their specialist lessons. They'll still get their maths, their English and science, and all of the specialist lessons that are listed there. But it will, of course, it will be done through a slightly different medium. And that's where we as educators are looking to ensure that students still get their full curriculum coverage, but it will just be able to be tailored to ensure that the students get that. So here's an example of how it will look. You see on the left-hand side there, you've got, let's say that's the class teacher. The class teacher will be in one half of the classroom, and that will have two sets of bubbles. So you'll have bubble one and bubble two, and that will be in one classroom, okay? And there'll be a maximum of 7 kids in each bubble. The teaching assistant then will be in the other classroom, and they will have bubble 3 and 4. And what we're seeing there is the teaching assistant will then be with those students and to support them with their learning. Please understand that although the teaching assistant will be in the classroom for some time, the teaching assistant will not be responsible for any of the teaching responsibilities. That's still down to the class teacher. And again, that's where we've adapted our teaching strategies to ensure that the students are being taught by the class teacher, but also that the teaching assistant can be utilized to further support or challenge students when in the classroom. So a simple example, and a number of parents have asked, does that mean that the teaching assistant will be teaching my child all of the time? No. So what a teacher will do, if I give you an example, is let's say there's a maths lesson. The teacher and one of the tools that we will be using we'll be using Seesaw. So the class teacher will start to introduce the lesson and will then use a purpose-made Seesaw video to start to introduce the learning for the students that day. Okay. Once the lesson has been introduced and the teacher has explained what the expectations are, the teacher will then swap with the teaching assistant, and the teaching assistant will move into, for instance, bubble 1 and 2, and will support those students with the learning that's taking place that the teacher's just introduced. The teacher will then move across to where the teaching assistant was, and then will introduce the lesson there, again, using exactly the same medium through Seesaw activities, and ensuring that the students in both classrooms and in all 4 bubbles are all getting access to the same learning content. But of course, as we know, different children learn in different way, and different children will need different supporting strategies, different differentiation strategies, and different challenging strategies to ensure that they are all meeting the same objective. Again, students will stay within their bubble, but the teacher and the teaching assistant will be able to move between the classrooms to support students. What I don't want parents to think is that half of the day the teacher's in one half and then the other half of the day the teacher's in the other. This will be quite fluid, and they'll move from one classroom to another on a regular basis throughout the day. Students, again, will still be kept at a 1.5 meter distance so that they are remaining within their particular bubbles. But as I said, it will only be the teacher and the TA that will move between them. When specialist teachers come, they will come into the classroom, they'll deliver the lesson, but they again will maintain that 1.5 meter distance when in the classroom. A priority over the first few weeks back already, what we're looking into is transitioning back into school. School is the same physical building, but it looks very different in terms of how classrooms will look, how we can interact with one another. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on our student well-being because we need to support the students. Whilst academics are of paramount importance, I think in the initial few weeks, we really need to ensure that our students' personal, social, and emotional well-being is being looked after. So that's one of the things, especially with the students moving from FS2 up into year 1, we know that they would have missed a term of where they would have had that opportunity to learn through a number of play-based activities. So we have to try to ensure that we're really focusing on the students' personal, social, and emotional skills. So with that, we're not just looking at how they can get along with one another, but also how they adapt to the new expectations of being in a school that's slightly different to the last time they were here. And that's going to come through a number of factors. That's going to come through our PSED, circle times, mindfulness, well-being curriculum that has been put together by our heads of house and our pastoral team. And again, these are things that are being planned for as I speak to ensure that when the children come in, they are getting the very best provision possible. They will still, of course, have that full year 1 curriculum, as I mentioned earlier, and specialist lessons they will have within their classroom. PE being the only exception, again, to where they go out of the classroom. But again, even during PE, they'll come in their PE kit, but they will not be breaking that social distancing. The class teacher will, of course, continue to use Classroom Monitor to access your child, to assess your child and determine their next steps in learning. And this, again, will be coming from the class teacher, not from the teaching assistant. So it will still be the class teacher's responsibility to assess each and every child. And that's why it's going to be so important that those class teachers are moving between the classrooms on a regular basis to have assessment for learning opportunities, to question and to understand where the different children are. And that's the same as what's happened in different years. So school timings, there's a drop off from 7:25 to 7:45 for year one. And again, within those, you will be given a 10-minute slot, and that will be indicated to you by the class teacher. And then we've got pickup. So pickup for year two is usually 2 p.m., but of course we've had to stagger it a little bit more. So now it's 1:45 to 2:15. And again, you'll be given times between them of when to come and pick up. Now, if, however, you have a child who's in year one, but you also have a child who's in year four, and they're staying to 2:50, what we're saying is that children can stay in school till the year ones can stay in sibling club, but that's only if you have signed up for sibling club and you have been given approval, and then we can ensure that students are looked after until their sibling is finished school, and then parents can come and pick up both children at exactly the same time. So I have siblings at school. So, one quick point I would like to say is that on Thursdays, school used to always finish earlier. However, now it will be slightly different. We will be in similar timings. So it doesn't make much of a difference for year one and two, but just to let parents know that our usual early finish for the key stage 2 and secondary students has slightly changed. And again, that will be communicated to you by those by the key stage 2 and secondary teachers Zoom sessions, just like this one. So I have siblings in school. What does that mean for you? So all class teachers will be ready to welcome students at from 7:20 in the morning. So siblings will be allowed to access their class from this time to support parents with drop off. So say you get to school at 7:20 and you need to drop off at 7:25. By the time you walk around, you can drop your child off straight away earlier in the morning, just to make sure that they're in the classroom. As in previous years, I know in the foundation stage 2 corridor, one of the things that used to happen is parents would wait outside the classroom. That won't be happening now. We'll be allowing students to get into the classroom straight away from 7:20. If your child is an older sibling in the school, they can stay with their class teacher or the teaching assistant, and that will be on a rotational basis until 3:30. This provision is only for students with siblings. I have had some funny requests in the past for friends and things, but sadly, this is only a provision that we can offer to people who have siblings at the school. If your children are in different houses and you'd like them to be in the same house, then that's something we can do. We just need to contact me, Brian McCauley, and I'll look into doing that for you as soon as possible. But if you could please leave your phone number and, of course, who you want to swap houses. So if your year 1 child is in Onyx and your year 6 child is in Emerald, let me know who you want to change. It's much quicker for us to try to make that change as quick as possible. And in terms of if you want the year 6 to move, I would have to speak to the year 6 assistant principal to make that happen. So what I'm going to cover now are some of the COVID procedures that we've been asked to follow. Now, please understand, I'm going to try and give you as clear a guidance on this as I can, but it is something that we have been asked to follow. These are not our own personalized guidelines. These are guidelines that the KHDA have asked us to follow. So these are the rules that we have been given, and so that we have to follow. So in classroom, and again, this kind of comes back to the, keeping your child at home if they're sick. This kind of really, I think, reiterates that point. So symptoms are being displayed in class. So the class teacher is responsible to refer any students with any of the COVID-19 symptoms, such as a cough, body aches, fatigue, shortness of breath, a sore nose, runny nose, diarrhea, nausea, or a headache to the school nurse for further screening. An extra adult, we will have extra adults available, and they will take that student down to the school nurse. If a child, a teacher, or a staff member begins to show any symptoms while at school, they must get isolated instantly. And we have got separate isolation rooms compared to our regular clinic. So we do have 2 separate areas, just because I know that's another question that parents have asked in the past. And the parent guardian of that child would then be notified immediately. So say your child starts to show some symptoms, the idea is that they would be taken down to one of the isolation rooms where we have a specific nurse ready to support that student, and then the parent or the guardian would be notified of that immediately. Once that person has been notified of that, they should be taken to hospital to take the necessary action. And of course, we have got designated isolation rooms within the academy, and these are separate to our regular clinic. As per the guidelines, parents will have roughly about 30 minutes to collect their child. Now, again, I've had parents who've asked me, but what if it takes longer than 30 minutes? Of course, we're not going to do anything drastic, but what we're trying to say is we're asking parents to come and collect their child as soon as possible. Now, It does say here that the school can call an ambulance, and that is true if a child is if we believe and the clinic believe that the child is unstable, and therefore we would need to make that call. Well, not we as teachers, but as the medical professionals within the school, they would need to make that call if they believe that the child is unstable and needs to be taken to the hospital under an emergency basis. So that's where we would then have to call an ambulance. And I think, parents, this is one of the reasons why I would stress we need to ensure that children at home, if they are sick, that they stay at home. What happens once they've been sent home? So a patient should not return to school until they've got their PCR result back. If the result is negative and there's a clinical assessment for a probable COVID-19 case, they should have 14 days quarantine, okay? If the result's negative and there's no clinical assessment for a probable case, then they can start to resume school so long as they are symptom-free, okay? So there's two steps almost. So if they're negative, but the assessment thinks that there might be a case, then what we do is we quarantine for 14 days. Okay, if the result is negative and there's no clinical assessment for a probable case, then the child can start to resume schooling as long as they're symptom-free. Now, if the result is positive, we will be tracing contacts of that patient. And this is where it's so important that we adhere to the drop-off procedure, to the bubbles and the social distancing within the academy, because we'll be able to look at who the patient would have been in contact with. And this includes teachers and classmates of that student or colleague who are considered close contacts. And close contacts is anyone who spent more than 15 minutes in a proximity of 2 meters with a positive case from the day of symptoms or the day that they get that positive PCR test. Everyone that is contacted or who's of immediate contact, they should all begin 14-day quarantine from either the day that symptoms started to show or the day that that positive test came. And that's really important, and that's why we as within the school will be making sure that we stick to our social distancing, we follow the rules on wearing masks, we follow the rules on keeping that social distancing, and of course trying to avoid anyone making contact with another person on the corridor and sticking with those, the one-way systems that we've set up within the school. And again, these are guidelines that have been provided to us by the authorities. Now, some of the frequently asked questions in regards to this was, my child's class are having to quarantine for 14 days. How would they access their learning? Of course, if that happens, we are ready to go straight into quarantine for 14 days. If that has to take place for a whole class, they would then switch over to remote learning. The class teacher would then start to adopt a similar practice to what took place in term 3 from last academic year, where the students would of course have their morning video, they would have Zoom and Seesaw activities sent to them. Even at short notice, we will be able to do that. Another question that came up was, my child has to quarantine for 14 days, but their classmates don't. That is most likely going to happen if your child has a negative COVID test, but they still have some symptoms. Or if they've been in contact with someone from outside of school, so maybe they've gone to a play date and then someone is tested positive, that's when they would then have to complete that 14-day quarantine before they return to their class. However, then, of course, because they were at the play date, then the other children in school wouldn't have been affected because they wouldn't have been there, so they would have been able to return to school, whereas your child was in contact with that person from the play date who had COVID-19, so then they would have to quarantine for those 14 days. All staff are going to be trained this week in terms of, all staff are being trained on this, and we have a designated health and safety staff members who are here to handle any emergency situations. Again, please understand that further information on these protocols and procedures will be shared in the parent handbook that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Okay. I want my child to have 100% remote learning. I've already had a number of conversations with parents about this. And again, this has already been, children have already been assigned to these classes at this point. If you, however, want to opt for remote learning, please do let me know if that's something you want. Please contact me as the assistant principal and I'll get in touch with you. Please leave your phone number because I find it's much quicker to have that conversation over the phone than backwards and forwards on email. If you need to change my child's house, Again, this is something I mentioned earlier. If you want to change your child's house, please just send me an email and we'll make sure to try to do our best to do that. We will always try to work around that, but again, there might be times where we have to maybe move one child out of the house where, for instance, if you have a year 6 and a year 1, it might be where you're asking, can I move my year 6 child? But if there's no space, we may then have to move the year 1 child to the year 6's house. So it might just be down to numbers in terms of how we can support you with that to bring children both into the same house. And my child is under 6 years old, but I want them to wear a mask. Absolutely. If your child is happy to wear a mask and they're under 6 years old, that's absolutely fine. So in year 1, when they come into the school, they'll be 5 years old. If you want them to wear a mask, that's totally down to you, but we cannot enforce any other child within the class who is under 6 years old to wear a mask. But again, we are finalizing the information from the KHDA with regards to, is it to the end of year 1 where they don't have to wear a mask, or is it 6 years and above that have to wear it? Because that's still something we're waiting just to find out. It's a little bit of a gray area, but we will make sure just to send that information out to parents as soon as we clarify that. But at the moment, once a child is 6 years old, they would have to wear a mask. That's the way we're understanding it currently from the government guidance. If there's a national spike in terms of coronavirus numbers, is the school prepared? Yes. One of the things that was really evident from our inspection, our remote learning inspection last year, was that our use of Seesaw, because we have such a good tool into our platform such as Seesaw, it's really easy for the students and for parents to access, so we're able to support the parents with remote learning. And again, we'll be able to use Zoom as a way of supporting those parents with those live sessions as we move forward. And this happens if we have to go into a lockdown again, or if we have to go into a full remote teaching practice like we did in term 3. This is something that we can revert back to. Will students keep the 1.5 metre distance? There's no doubt that it will be unusual for the students of all ages. However, we will be supporting them, and that will come through education. That will come through with the students with those first couple of weeks in school. We need to educate them on how to socially distance and how to support one another within that session. So we will be doing our best to support the students. And we believe that students will adapt quickly the sooner that they're in school. So as soon as they're back in school, they'll become much more apparent to them on how to deal with it, versus if they were to take remote learning, they'll still have the educational side of it, but they might struggle a little bit when they come back into school because they'll have to adapt to a different set of norms. Whereas the children who start school, we would say that they'll become quite adapted to the new protocols of social distancing, sanitizing, using your own resources much quicker. Will there be big group events? And sadly, there won't be. We've had to cancel them so far because it's just not safe. There's no way that we can logistically have our house assemblies or our big theatre productions, which is really sad. But for the safety of the students, we've had to make that hard decision. I do hope that the coronavirus maybe goes away, or we find a vaccine, and then hopefully we can then start to return these things that kind of make WSO unique. So I really hope that we can get to that point as soon as possible. I'd like to thank everyone for listening so far. I've gone through most of the questions that came through from the parents, but again, if you do have any further questions, please, my email address is there at the bottom. Please do give me an email and I'll try to get back to you. Or if you require a phone call, I think phone calls are usually much quicker and I'm able to answer and address any concerns that parents have much quicker from a phone call rather than over email. So please send me an email with your questions and your phone number and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. As I said, you're going to find that we've had this Zoom today. There'll be a video sent out, which I believe most of you will have received already, about returning to school and how that will look. Then we'll have our school handbook. That's going to be a coronavirus specific one, where we're going to provide you with more information about how things are taking place within school. And then finally, we're going to have our Meet the Teacher session, which of course the class teacher will be in contact with you. On top of that, we have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have a number of social media platforms that I would really strongly encourage parents to, if you're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, please do follow the school. Take a look us up. It's WSO Primary Principal, WSO CEO. So looking us up, or even just email me and I can send you through all the different Twitter handles or Facebook groups that you can then follow just to keep up to date with things that are happening within school. Of course, we will still be doing our primary communication through Seesaw, as well as using Seesaw as our primary learning platform as well. Thank you very much, parents. I hope I have covered everything there as best I can. Again, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I want to thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a lovely day.